All right, good morning, Biology 104. Today we're going to be talking about mammals and their characteristics. And the short little description here is the hairy ones. So for our mammal characteristics, they're going to produce hair, which is going to be composed mostly of keratin. The coat of a mammal is called its pelage. And they have mammary glands, sebaceous glands, sweat glands, scent glands, all these different glands. They're going to produce these different secretions in their integumentary system. For the mammary glands, right, they're called mammals. That's going to be that defining characteristic for this group, and that mammary glands produce milk. They are endotherms, and they have a four-chambered heart. So endotherms, they are regulating their own body temperature. So they're going to have higher metabolisms, and they're going to have to eat more. Most mammals exhibit different types of teeth. We'll look at that. We call that heterodont. Mammals have movable eyelids and external ears. They exhibit different reproductive patterns and reproductive cycles that we'll look at. For the offspring, they can be described as either precocial or altricial. So for mammal hair, when you think of a mammal, you should think of, if you're going to think of just simple things, you should think of hair, and you should think of mammary glands. And for their hair, their pelage, they're going to have under and guard hair. For the under hair, this is going to be smaller, shorter hairs that are thinner. They're very dense, though, in number, and they are very soft. And that under hair is underneath the guard hair, which are longer, thicker, protective hairs that stick out farther. So you can think of it like, trees, and then underneath the trees, so the trees are kind of spread out. That would be like the guard hair. They're very tall. And then underneath you have all this shrubbery and brush that are shorter and thinner. That's basically how you could think of the hair. So the under hair is all that shrubbery on the bottom, these thin, dense hairs. And that provides the insulation, the warmth. And then the guard hairs actually stick out, and those are going to provide protection. The guard hairs themselves, they do have hollow chambers that help retain heat, as you can see here on the top right of this diagram, all these little hollow openings, and that actually helps trap heat and also insulate the body of the mammal, as well as all that dense under hair underneath. So they're actually both going to help provide insulation for the mammals. And then here's a side view of what that looks like. You see the guard hairs coming up much higher, and then the under hair, or what we call the undercoat, not coming up near as high. For them to lose their hairs, they would call that molting. Some different functions of hair. Of course, we looked at that insulation. Also, it can be protective. They can be hard, and they can actually be kind of like spikes that can prevent predators from catching them or eating them. It can inhibit that. They can also be for camouflage. It can help them blend in with their environment. That's good for prey and predators. For the predators, they're not seen by their prey, and for the prey, they can help avoid being noticed by the predators. It can also be used for warning signals, which we'll look at. And then for their whiskers, they're going to provide environmental information. They're sensory. And we call those whiskers, we call them vibrissae. So they're sensory. What they can help is they can help detect touch. They can feel vibrations, very, very slight vibrations, even in the air. And what that can help them do is judge the distance between themselves and other objects, which is pretty incredible. You think about how finely tuned that sensation must be to be able to feel the distance from a moving object to their own bodies. They can sense just the air. They can sense prey. They can judge the size of objects from that as well. They can detect texture. It's really incredible that they'll also, we think about cat whiskers, they can even convey information about their own moods, essentially. So for example, you see this little chart here, but if their whiskers are naturally just drooping, that means they're very calm and relaxed. If their whiskers are pointing up, that means they're happy. Think of it like a smiley face. They're experiencing joy and contentment. If their whiskers are pushed forward, that means they're curious and they're alert. Maybe they're being playful, or something like that, if they pull their whiskers back against their face, then you need to give them some space, because they're probably fearful of something in that moment, or there's some aggression there. And all that information is being conveyed in their whiskers. So when we talk about warning coloration with mammal hair, something interesting that deer can do is when they run away from a predator, they will flash their tails. The underside of their tails are white, and they'll flash it up, and then they'll take it away, and then they'll flash it up and take it away. And it's very hard for a predator to follow the motion of a deer, the movement of it, because when the tail flashes, they can locate it, but then when it goes away, it's like it disappears for a second. And then they'll follow in the wrong direction, and you'll notice the deer will change directions. They'll kind of zigzag and move around, and they're very good at losing a predator that way. And then also they can raise their tails to tell other deer that danger is present. Something cool about the zebra is for its coloration, it works as camouflage in a herd, right? If they're all together, you can't tell one from the next. It looks like this humongous, amorphous rock or something. And what's cool about it too is the compound eyes of insects, like flies, different parasites. When they try to land on a zebra, the pattern messes with their focus, and they can't focus on it, and they'll actually get kind of dizzy, and then they won't be able to land and bite the zebra. So it's, it can be warning, it can be camouflage, and it can prevent parasite bites. And then here's just an image of what the camouflage looks like. Really, if you're not looking for that particular animal in the image or in your environment, you could very easily not notice it. My cat has a fur coat that blends in really well with dry leaves, and he'll be sitting in the yard when I'm walking out there, and I won't even notice him. And then he'll jump out on my leg or something, just being playful, but his fur coat really helps him blend in well. So some other functions of hairs. When we think of a quill, unlike a porcupine, that actually is a modified type of hair. Horns are also a modified type of hair. We have true horns. It's going to be found in cows and sheep. And those horns are not shed and are found throughout the creature's life as it develops. And it will be found in both males and females in the species. So that would be a true horn. Then you also have something called an antler. Antler are found in the deer family. They're composed entirely of bone, but covered in a highly vascular soft skin called velvet. And these are shed annually and are found only in males. So that would be an example of sexual dimorphism. So that's why if you hike a lot, you may have actually found antlers just in the woods somewhere. And that's because they're going to be shed. So to summarize the difference between antlers and horns, antlers are only on males. Horns are on both males and females. Some examples for a horn, you could think of cattle, sheep, goats, bison. For examples of antlers, you could look at deer, moose, elk, caribou, and reindeer. For antlers, they're typically going to be branched. They'll have all these branches, or what they call points, and they're going to grow and shed every year. Horns are not branched, they never shed, and they continue growing throughout the animal's life. Antlers are made of bone covered by velvet. Horns have a bony center that's covered by keratin, or what we think of when we think of like a fingernail. Antlers are part of the animal's skull. Horns are attached to the skull with connective tissue. So those are the differences between antlers and horns. And then again, the key characteristic for mammals is going to be mammary glands. So although they have all these different types of glands, the one that we associate with mammals, right, they're called mammals, is mammary glands. So mammary glands are going to produce milk to feed their young. What's cool about mammary glands is they're actually a modified form of a sweat gland, but in this case they're modified to produce nutritious milk. And they'll use that to nourish their offspring. And that's what's going to form those breasts, like in humans, or udders in different animals. So since it is making these secretions to the outside of its body, it's going to be glandular tissue. It's going to have these ducts that you can see here in this image. Fat, fibrous tissue. The fat provides good cushion for all the glands and ducts. And it will become functional in the females in the species due to the different hormones. That's what's going to determine that. Some different hormones in females that will control it would be prolactin. That would be for producing the milk. Oxytocin. That would be for milk letdown, which has a huge surge during childbirth, which is good. The milk lets down after the baby is born. So the oxytocin surge helps stimulate that. And then also progesterone, which is what helps lead to the development of the glands in the first place. And then there's other supporting hormones as well. So here's just the underside of an animal. You can see all the mammary glands, the breast, and the nipples. And for these organisms that have lots of offspring at once in a litter, they need to have more breast to be able to feed more young. Some interesting examples of animals with lots of breast. One of them would be the natal multi-mammat rat, which has up to 36 breasts, or 18 pairs, so 18 on each side. The largest mammary glands would be the blue whale, which its glands are about 1.5 meters long, so about 4.5 feet long, which is pretty crazy. But their calves are so large, they need these larger glands in the mothers to be able to feed them. Here's an image on the left. This is a beluga whale calf nursing, and then on the right you have a humpback whale, nursing from its mother's mammary glands. And whales, porpoises, dolphins, they're actually all in the same order. It's called cetacean. Sometimes dolphins will be called a type of whale, but they're all mammals. And that whale milk you see there in the image on the right, these are mammals. They have to nurse underwater. So the mammal whale milk has to actually be a lot thicker than terrestrial mammals. So for these organisms, it'll be maybe up to 50% fat. So not going to be soluble in water. So when it comes out, it stays really thick, very low water content, because you don't want it to dissolve in the water when it comes out of the mammary glands. So it's been described as like toothpaste or butter. And when it comes out, they're able to feed without it dispersing in the water. It's extremely dense and nutritious. Structure of a canine heart. This is what it looks like. So for our mammals, they are going to have their 4-chambered heart. In anatomy, you'll learn all the parts of the human heart, of course. You're not going to have to learn all of that in Bio 104. But they are endotherms, and they do have a 4-chambered heart, which would differentiate them from amphibians and most of the reptiles, which have a 3-chambered heart, although the crocodiles do have a 4-chambered heart, but they are the exception among the reptiles. So for mammal teeth, most mammals are going to have a bunch of different types of teeth. It helps correlate to their diets. If their diets are more plant-based, they're going to have flatter teeth. If it's more carnivorous, they're going to have sharper teeth, because it's correlates to the food that they're going to be eating. Some mammals will actually not have any teeth. For example, the anteater. Some mammals, all the teeth look the same, but most of them are going to be heterodont, where they all look different. If they're all the same, they call that homodont. So here's an anteater. They don't need any teeth because they're eating insects, and the insects are small enough, even though their exoskeletons are very firm. They're so small that the anteater is able to pull them into their mouth, push them against their palate, and crush them. And they can actually eat really fast. Their tongues can move in and out of their mouths up to 3 times per second. So they're just constantly moving around, just zapping up these insects and eating them. Their tongues are very, very sticky. So when they stick out, into an anthill, they're going to be able to stick to dozens of ants at a time, and they can do that 3 times per second. Really cool mammals. So the different types of teeth that mammals will have. We have incisors. These are their front teeth, and they're in dark blue in the image up here that you can see. The second set of teeth that you'll see in a mammal mouth, if they're heterodont, will be the canines, and these are pointed teeth, so you see here in green. And then you have the premolars, so back teeth with horizontal surfaces. This is really good for grinding, right? Your incisors and your canines are good for biting into things, like biting into the apple. And then as it moves towards the back of your mouth into the premolars and then the molars, where it's more horizontal surfaces, it grinds what you're eating up into pieces, for example, an apple or anything. Where these names come from, incisor, that comes from a Latin word that means to cut. So it's sharp, it cuts into things, slices things. Canines are named after dogs or canines. They're pointed teeth. They use to tear it into food. So our canines are named after that. They're also called canines, sometimes called eye teeth. And that's because if you look at their position in the mouth, it's directly below the eyes. And then premolars, of course, is before. So it comes before the molars. So it's like a transitional tooth. And then the molars would be in the back. The word mola means a millstone, where a millstone would be used to grind grain. And the molars come from mola, is to grind what you eat. So that's why they have all those names that they do. So even though the skull shape can be very different, oftentimes, usually, they're going to have these different types of teeth spread out from the front to the back of their mouth. And of course, in predators, it's advantageous for them for even their premolars and molars to be more pointed than what you would see in herbivores. And again, this is just adapted to their food source. If they're eating, this would be a good example of what the human incisors, canines, premolars, and molars would look like, which when you see that in this shape, it's really optimized for an omnivorous diet, plants and animal tissue, for eating both. It works really well for both. And our digestive systems are a similar length to animals that are omnivores as well. Usually carnivores have short digestive systems, and herbivores have very long digestive systems, because it takes a longer amount of time to break down cellulose in plant material. So for mammals' eyes, they have movable eyelids and fleshy external ears. Here, this fleshy external ear is from a chimpanzee. And I put this one on here because this was a specific chimpanzee called Julie. And in her little group, she became a role model of sorts. And what she did was she took a little piece of straw and put it in her ears. And she just started doing it. The other chimpanzees saw her. There's about 11 others in her group. And they, were a little hesitant at first. But then eventually all of them started putting this wheat in their ears. It provides no benefits for them. It was basically like a little cultural tradition that they started doing, which is really cool to see that in animals. There was a quote from an article that I read, and it said, everybody can wear rings in their ears, but you just have to come to the idea to do it, to put the wheat in your ear. And apparently after that chimpanzee died, the other chimpanzees continued to do it after her death. So for mammal reproduction, first type we're going to have is something called a monotreme. These are also called prototherians. And these mammals
get ready in the
laying mammals, which is really cool. So this would include the platypus. And they do feed their young with milk as well, which is really cool. The echidnas are shown in this image. Sometimes they're described as a spiny anteater, and they're quill-covered monotremes, and they live in Australia and New Guinea. The 4 extant species of echidnas and the platypus are the only living mammals that lay eggs, and the only surviving members of the order Monotremata, which is pretty cool to see that those organisms are still around. The platypus. Truly a mystery of nature, or some might call a freak of nature, depending on who you ask. But the platypus, it was actually discovered in as recently as 1798, and it was discovered in Australia. There was a captain, his name was John Hunter, and he was actually a governor of New South Wales at the time. And when he went to Australia on an expedition, he actually found the remains of this animal, this mammal. And he actually took it and he sent it back. He drew it up and then he sent the pelt back to Great Britain. And the scientists there, the British scientists, they thought the platypus was fake. They literally thought somebody had sewed together different pieces of different animals, because the different parts of a platypus look like different types of animals. Right? The bill looks like a duck. The body looks like it came from a beaver or an otter. The tail looks just like a beaver's tail. And the eggs, it lays eggs like a bird or a reptile, which is very unique. That's very strange, very rare. And the milk it also produces to feed its young. So it literally looks like just a mishmash of all these different types of animals. So they really thought that they were being tricked, and they had been deceived before. Certain people had presented fake animals, so there is reason for it to be suspect. And its scientific name, Platypus anatomist, actually means flat-foot duck, which, is pretty apt considering what they look like. So pretty cool. The actual original specimen that was sent back to Great Britain is still in a British museum there, which is pretty cool. Here's what a platypus looks like as a newborn, which is super adorable looking. You see they're really soft when they first hatch out of their eggs. Now, for an animal to get out of an egg, they actually have to have what's called an egg tooth, and that helps them tear in to the eggshell so they can get out. Or there's a little nub on the top of their noses. It's called a caruncle. They have to have one of the two to be able to get out of an egg. And monotremes are the only group of animals that actually have both of those things to help them hatch out of their eggs. For mammal reproduction, we have also marsupials. So we have the monotremes, and then number 2 would be the marsupials, and these are metatherians. These mammals have a very short gestational period, and there's a very primitive placenta, but the young, they do not implant into the uterus. So the embryo is born prematurely, extremely early. It's very undeveloped. And then the organism is in a pouch, and that is where its development will be completed. So you think about a kangaroo or an opossum. Those organisms have pouches. And, the reproductive investment would be in the lactation, not in the gestation. So, there is a difference between an opossum and a possum. Opossum are those in North America, marsupials. They have a pointed snout, a bare tail, while simply possum would refer to different, mostly furry-tailed marsupials from Australia, New Guinea, and China. So North America, opossums are the only marsupials in North America. I actually grew up on a street called a Possum Trot, which is pretty cool. So here's an embryo within the pouch. You can just see how underdeveloped it is, and that's where it's going to complete its development, is in that pouch. Here's an opossum's pouch. You can see when they're really small, and then as they start to more fully develop in their pouch. And then our third type would be the placentals, or the eutherians. So this group would be most mammals, and they exhibit something that's called viviparity. So a placenta is present. The placenta is a structure that develops inside the uterus to supply the embryo with nutrition and oxygen. Think about human reproduction. This is how it would work. We would be eutherians. So the reproductive investment is in the gestational period, because that is much longer. Different gestational periods vary for different mammals. Elephants have, I believe, the longest. So in this image, I actually got this from an article I was reading about elephants. It says the female elephant had picked the waters of the Oliphant's River, a popular gathering place for thirsty herds, for this delivery. And after the longest known gestation period of any mammal, which is up to 680 days, newborns emerge weighing around 230 pounds. So extremely long gestational period. You're looking at almost 2 years before the baby is born. And then it is born at about 230 pounds. So it's massive. And in this case, it gave birth in water. So the herd actually surrounded the offspring so that they could help hold its head out of the water so it wouldn't drown while it was still dizzy and weak until it could get its feet under itself, and then it could eventually walk out of the water on its own. Really cool. We don't think of whales as mammals, but they are, right? They have a blowhole. They actually have hair. Certain ones in their early development stages do have sensory hairs, and they are sexually reproducing mammals. Here's a placenta from a whale, and it can weigh anywhere from 200 pounds to 1,000 pounds. So when the placenta is released after birth, that is when a lot of scavengers will come and feed on all that nutritious material. So some different gestational periods for different organisms. We see mice, they have a 21-day gestational period. Dogs, 60 days. Humans, 270 days. And then elephants, 660 to 680 days. So elephants are going to have that longest gestation period. The young, the offspring, they can either be precocial or altricial. If they are precocial, that means the offspring is independent at birth. And herd animals are going to be like this. So they will produce offspring, and they might be awkward at first, but then they're going to get their feet under themselves, and they're going to be moving around, running around with the herd. So very well developed. Altricial organisms, when they're born, think of humans, they're going to be very dependent at birth. So we usually use that to describe certain birds and mammals. And we'll use that for both. So mammal offspring could be precocial or altricial. So here's some examples of some precocial organisms. Think of elephants, deer, these different herd animals. They'll have offspring, and then they just start moving around very well. They're still going to have protection in the herd, but they're able to move. Then we look at altricial animals like a squirrel, even pandas or birds, extremely weak and dependent. So altricial would be dependent organisms. So for these mammals, we're going to see a lot of different reproductive cycles. For the female mammals, their reproductive cycles are called estrus, or you may have heard it called heat. And this is the time when the females will receive the males. So you have monoestrus. That would mean mono one estrus per year, or breeding season. We see this in wolves. You can have polyestrus, so many, and this would be many estrus events per year, or many heat events. And we'll see that in mice. So when you have these organisms that are polyestrus, and they also have short gestational periods, you're going to have their populations jump super fast. Versus, monoestrus, larger organisms and longer gestation periods, their populations will increase more slowly. So you have monoestrus, polyestrus. You also have something called induced ovulation. So this would mean that ovulation occurs when mating occurs, which is what we see in rabbits. And that can lead to really fast population jumps. Then you have menstrual cycle. So this would be a different system, and this is what occurs in primates, including humans. So the females undergo a menstrual cycle in which they shed the lining of their uterus, in which case there is bleeding. And then sexual intercourse can occur at any time during that cycle, even if ovulation has not occurred. So sex becomes more than just for reproduction in this case. It strengthens the bonds between males and females. We won't go as in depth into the menstrual cycle as we will in anatomy if you take that course, but particularly anatomy and physiology too, but I will give you the basics of it right now. So for the menstrual cycle, it's going to have 4 phases. It's going to be menstruation, the follicular phase, ovulation, and the luteal phase. So menstruation marks the beginning. That's where the bleeding will be. Then it goes into the follicular phase, which is where the follicle develops in the ovary. Ovulation is the release of the egg. And then the luteal phase occurs after ovulation, when the uterine lining prepares for potential implantation. If there is no pregnancy, then the uterine lining actually sheds, and that leads back to menstruation. And that would be a fertilization. Doesn't happen. So menstruation will be days 1 to 5. Follicular phase is days 6 to 14. Ovulation will be at day 14. And then the luteal phase will be the rest, which will be days 15 through 28. So it's about a 1 month cycle. And then here's just a couple images you can look at for the variety of mammals that we see. You think about a platypus and a dolphin. Very different organisms, yet both mammals. Aardvark, shrew, walrus, manatee. You have a deer, armadillo, elephant, chimpanzee, humans. Very big variety in the mammals. There is a video at the end you're welcome to watch if you open this PowerPoint and scroll to the last slide on Canvas. I always try to add little related videos and things that you can check out. But that will be our mammal notes.